Hi there, I'm Eric Wordweaver Sjerven, Goat of the Ridgar folk here in East Texas, and I'd like to welcome you to the Raven's Call. This is a show where I ramble on about different heathen-related subjects, just kind of whatever strikes my fancy at the time, sets my mind on fire. Big UPG warning at the beginning of this. I am not what you would call a hardcore recon. I am not a fluffy bunny either. I am one of those that's kind of middle of the road. I pull from historical elements, reconstructionist elements, and then I also kind of grow into my own thing. Which if you watched my last video and understand the premise of this video, you'll understand why that's important to me. So before we get into that, let's handle some housekeeping stuff. Please hit subscribe down below, ding the bell so you stay up to date on everything that's going on with the channel. The more you interact with my videos, hitting like, commenting down below, all of that, the more it gets out to other people. YouTube sees these interactions and says, hey, people like this, we should show it to more people. I don't monetize my videos, so I don't get the ad thing going, so YouTube doesn't like to push those nearly as much. They tend to push more of the monetized videos because that helps with their ad revenue schemes. And so, no disrespect to YouTube, business is business, but if you guys want these to get out and for other people to see them, then share them around. I'd appreciate it. So, down below, you will see all kinds of contact information. There's a Facebook group where I do most of my interactions. Hit me up there. You can also hit me up in any of the other methods down below. There's email. I've got a Twitter account, my mailing address, some PO boxes down there in case you guys want to send snail mail. Not that anybody does these days, but still, if it's there, if you guys wanted to. I also have a review channel, Raving Raven Reviews. You can check those out on the channel. I pop those up at an irregular schedule. It's just kind of whenever I have something that I want to throw up there. Lately, it's been kind of on Mondays, but I don't set a hard set schedule for that. That one's more fun and on the side, so I'll do what I can there. Without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's subject. Now, if you watched last week's video, you will have known that I just went on a complete and total rant about tribal identity and the building of one's tribal identity. I am very much what I would call a tribal heathen. That's not necessarily what everybody else will call a tribal heathen. I am a tribal heathen because I believe in tribal structures. I like the idea of tribe as far as disparate clans coming together and binding around a singular leadership, and then the interaction of these yards in one kind of greater yard. It's very much the village mentality. There's some disparate views on tribalism that I have seen lately that it's more, there's some of the borderline racial stuff that gets involved in all of that. That's not the route that I go. Okay, guys, just so you know. No, I don't go that route. So anyway, my ideas here are that I want to see more people building tribal identities. Go back and watch the rant to get why that is, because if I start explaining it here, I'm going to go left again and we'll lose another video. Because that last video was supposed to be this video. Anyway, today we're going to talk about a certain element on how you build your tribal identity. And that is going to be one of the first really building blocks that I see, not necessarily one of the first, but one of the key building blocks to building a tribal identity, and that is building tribal mythology. Now, we've looked at the Eddas and the sagas before, and during my rant, I touched on them heavily. The Eddas and sagas, of course, were written back in the day, but they weren't written down by heathens. They were surviving texts, or they were written down by Snorri, stuff like that. They're secondary at best. More than likely, some of them are actually tertiary sources, and they are suspect in some areas, incomplete in others, and just downright inaccurate in some spots. If you look even at the Havamal, which is the sayings of Har, the High One, supposedly advice given by Odin, it's a good list of some positive, just general good advice, some good wisdom. But even then, there's some archaic ideology that occurs in there, some influences from outside sources that you can see in some of the advice that's given that doesn't necessarily transfer back to really heathen views before the conversion. So there's definitely some influences throughout the lore in different areas, and you kind of have to go with what you got. One of the things that I touched on in the last video, of course, was that we don't really have an overarching heathenry. And so it was a disparate collection of tribal beliefs and tribal structures. A lot of what we have in this kind of globalized, boiled down, melting pot version of heathenry today is stuff that is pulled and viked from different groups and kind of put into one big melting pot of heathenry. And a lot of it, of course, in the popular vernacular comes from the Norse Icelandic side. A lot of things in kind of the hardcore recon side of elements comes from more of an Anglo-Saxon side of things. And then, of course, there's the more Germanic. It's all over the place. But in all reality, even within each of those separate monikers, there's regional differences, tribal differences, differences from time and place. There's so many elements to heathenry that are important, that get washed away in the need to make some big labeled thing. Everybody wants to belong to the big thing. And so part of that, of course, is the mythos, the mythology that surrounds heathenry. And you find yourself glomming onto one particular set of mythology and going with it. Some will hang on hard to like Anglo-Saxon sources and that Anglo-Saxon mythology. A vast majority will glom onto the northern Scandinavian, Norse Icelandic side of things. Some on the Swedish side of things, just depending on which sources you're looking at, what has survived, and how much you dig. A lot of people will go as far as the Eddas and the Sagas, but actually most people will only go so far as the Eddas. They'll read a book on Norse mythology, which is a retelling of the prose and poetic Eddas in a narrative form, and they will kind of go from there and just operate based on that alone, and they never really go any deeper than that. They're very superficial as far as their application of the mythos and the understanding of heathen worldview. And so today I want to talk a little bit more on the mythos element of things, because just because we have things passed down to us in the Eddas and the Sagas does not mean that that's necessarily how it is. The mythology of the world around us, the understanding of the gods and goddesses, the interaction between the gods and goddesses and the world around us it's more complex than what is passed down in the few little sources that we have. We can look back at archaeology, we can look back at sociological elements, we can look at different contemporary sources and see things that don't necessarily match up with some of the mythos. And one of the things I like to pull from is if you look at the story of the nerveless processional, where one individual took an idol of Nerthos, earth goddess, in the Anglo-Saxon sources and the more mainland sources. Led her on a processional through the area where people would make sacrifices to this idol that's pulled on this wagon, and then all of the sacrifices were taken back to the little island where her wagon was held, and they were bogged. And then, of course, her wagon was then put away and stored and tended until the next processional the following year. Now, the reason for that is because the belief was that, at least seemingly the belief was that the goddess actually inhabited that idol during that period of time, and by taking her around, she was blessing the areas to which she traveled. She was going through the world. This is, in essence, a show of kind of a regional belief structure, a regional mythos. It was the belief that Nerthos inhabited the statue, and that by going through the statue and everything, going around, she was there with them. Again, with the gods of limited access kind of element, there were specific times of year where she did this, and when she took up that residence, that was the time to do the processional. But it was based on their understanding, their views, their regional influences, and that's how it worked. And that's part of building tribal mythos. Like, for example, we don't have mythos that says that the earth turns green when a specific god or goddess comes back to it when they turn their attention to the world around us. It's what we take from our interactions with them, our learning about the gods, our learning from the lore, all of these things, because the stories that we have of the gods are very much about their tribal interactions, their interactions between the Yard of the Aesir and the Yard of the Jotun or the Vanir or the men of Midgard, that kind of thing. We don't have a whole lot that focuses on their direct influence on the environment around them, their attention that they turn seasonally to the world, and we build our own belief structures on that. we, as my tribe, Ridgar, has developed our own tribal mythology to a certain extent, and we continue to build on that. As we continue to learn and we continue to develop, we look around the world around us and we see influences, we see elements, and we begin to understand it better. We delve deeper, we apply our own logic and reasoning, we see the world around us, and we build the story from our understanding, from our learning, from our observations that tell us what's going on, why it's going on, how it's going on, and what elements are there, you know? Regions take on different importances. For instance, if you look at, say, whether or not you do a midsummer blow, if you do a midsummer celebration, some do, some don't. Midsummer, you're getting into kind of questionable historical accuracy on that one. I know you can do the research. I'm not going to sit here and spat it off the top of my head because I'm not looking at the paper as far as the historical stuff goes, and I don't want to misquote something. But generally speaking, we do a midsummer blow. We do a midsummer because we honor Suna. We honor Suna because we're from Texas. And in the olden days in Northern Europe, it was the winters that you had to endure. It was the winters you needed protection from. You needed to have supplies to make it through the winter. You needed the blessings of the family, blessings on the family of luck to be able to endure it. If you're from Texas or from the South in the U.S. in general, you will know that's not what we need help with. Our winters are mild. We need help with our summers because our summers are intense. And so Shuna, as she drives the chariot across the sun, across the sky, pulling sun, we need her blessings so that she will shield us a little bit, maybe spare us a little bit, maybe not kill all of the crops, maybe not dry up all of our water sources, you know, these kind of things. We need blessings from Suna. We also seek the luck for success in the year to come and all the ventures that we have undergoing and things like that. You know, the typical things that you will see. But our tribal mythology focuses heavily on Suna, protect us in this Texas summer and let us survive, you know, because power bills and fires and all of these things that go into surviving a Texas summer are there. Now, don't get me wrong, in the modern day, it's not like we're all going to die of drought out here, but we have in our area had some very difficult summers in the past. Our more recent summers have been more manageable. There's reasons for that on a scientific level, but like this year we didn't even break 100 until we hit August, I think. So we had a very mild summer for Texas. We have had some that were not so. We've had the hundreds where we were in 100-degree temperatures for quite a while. That's an exaggeration on the hundreds. I think it was 30 days at least of breaking 100 every day. Anyway, we have those kind of things. Fires. There was one point in time where the sons of most people walked across Texas because all of Texas was on fire. California gets this regularly. Different areas of the U.S. see fires during the summer at specific times. It's just kind of a thing. And that's when people would look to the gods and ask for help and for protection because these are God level interventions, that's more in their wheelhouse kind of thing. But even more than that, it's just a sense of tribal identity and cultural identity that comes from understanding the world around you and seeing the influence of the gods and goddesses, coming to understand that, I don't want to share too much of our tribal mythos for obvious reasons. Like I'm not going to share the mythology around it. But one of the things that I see is the presence of Iduna during the time of year that most would refer to as Ostra, okay? Because here's a prime example, all right? My tribe does not practice Ostra. We celebrate what we call Lifka, which is life returning, or returning life to. And this is the time where we see Idun turning her attention to Midgard and bringing with her life like she does with the apples. There's more to it, there's more complexity, but I'm not going to get into all of that on YouTube because that's for my tribe. That's not for your tribes. I'm just giving you kind of a rough example. There are tribes that incorporate some of the Ragnarokian cycles as far as an understanding of that and the elements that those play into the tribal dynamics. There are those that cast it out completely and don't focus on that at all. Heathenry itself is made up of multiple different cultures within it. not even cult. There's the priest cult, warrior cult, the hearth cult, all of this stuff. I've recently had a really cool conversation with one of my dear friends on all of this, so it's all kind of right there for me, and so I'm just kind of meh. But understanding the mythology aspect is one part of the culture that helps to give that cultural identity. And you're not going to get that just going through the Eddas and the Sagas. That's not going to be there because that kind of stuff wasn't written down. That kind of stuff didn't necessarily survive. So where do you go to find that? You go to folk tales, you go to storytelling traditions, you go to archaeological digs, you go to research where they, again, it's archaeological, anthropological, these kind of things, where you can see traditions that were passed down, and you begin to understand why they did those things when they did those things. And again, on the building of tribal identity, you incorporated a piece of yourself into it. Now, building the tribal mythos isn't necessarily something that you're putting a piece of yourself in. What you're doing is understanding how the tribe and you yourself view the world around you and the interaction of the gods around you. For one, does your tribal mythos include the Ragnarok cycle? If so, what does that mean to your tribal mythos? What does the summer mean to your mythos? What does the spring or the fall or the winter? Do you even have those seasons? What do these mean? What if you're in the southern hemisphere and all of these are reversed from when everybody else does? Your mythos is going to be a little bit different because the interaction of the gods with your region may be different. The gods themselves are not storybook characters. This is not something where there is canon. This is entities that exist in sacred time and sacred space. Therefore, they are not bound by necessarily the same limitations that we are. They are not limited in chronological order the way that we are. Our perception of time is as very lineal, and that may not be how the gods interact. Do we know? No, we can't know because that's sacred time, sacred space. We only have the profane world with which we can work. So who's to say that Heathen doesn't go south of the border later in the year before returning back up to the northern hemisphere? I, for one, can't say it because I'm not one of the gods. But if you observe the gods around you in this way, if you see this, if you experience this through ritual and through your own observations and interactions, then you begin to build an understanding. People do this regardless. It's not like I've got to tell you and go out and make up your own mind on what the world is and how the world works. People do this all the time, just not usually with the things that matter. You will create a kind of personal mythology about the world around you. And this may include conspiracy theories. This could come down to the simple basis of, are people inherently good or inherently bad? You can't know, but you reconcile that within your mind by creating your own internal mythology, and then you operate from that internal mythology because you make observations and you make decisions based on what you see. You see enough things to make you feel that people are inherently flawed and that they will screw you over at any opportunity. Or you make the observations that say people are inherently good and given the opportunity, they're going to do the right thing. And you're going to recognize there's deviations, that not everything is necessarily as straightforward and easy as that. But you come up with a core belief structure, a core mythology around this, and you operate from that. People have personal mythologies with regards to socioeconomic elements, the belief that all billionaires are money-grubbing and evil and need to be cast aside because they're abusing the working class, or the belief that working class are lazy and useless and can't be trusted, or it goes all around. Everybody's got it. In psychology, we call these things heuristics, which are they're essentially mental shortcuts. They are associations that we make in the brain that, once codified, become a quick synapses reference. It's something that can be easily pulled instantaneously. There are assumptions that are made based on repetitive observation that allow the brain to shortcut some of the math necessary to synthesize and analyze situations. If you look at something and you have always experienced this to occur with relation to this, then the brain's going to automatically assume, okay, you see a switch on the wall, right? a switch on the wall that you associate with a light switch. Why? Because every time you've ever walked into a building and seen a light switch, you flip it on, the lights come on. If the lights don't come on, that means there's something wrong. That means that the power doesn't work, or that you got a bulb out, or something like that. You know, that's a heuristic. The brain automatically assumes that is a light switch. What if it's not a light switch? What if you walk in and this is the one crazy house that has the switch for the garbage disposal by the front door? Why would anybody do that? I don't know, maybe to make sure you can't turn it on while you got your hand in the thing. Seems kind of silly to me. Somebody could walk in and hit it while you're pulling the stuff out of the disposal. But still, it could be. It's not a given, but the heuristics in our mind make us assume that it is, because that is the way that it's always been for us. That is the pattern, and it's pattern recognition. Human beings are very much based on pattern recognition. So we build these internal personal mythologies, taking that automatic thing and building it outwards, but doing so consciously. Doing so not through automatic pattern recognition, but through analytical thought, through contemplation, through looking inwards and looking outwards, through really examining the world and our belief structure. We can begin to see the truth of the mythology around us. We can see when we feel like the wild hunt rides through. We can see what we feel are Jotun walking on the face of Midgard as Thor goes to battle. On a metaphorical level and on a metaphysical level and on a very literal level, you can see these interactions. You build your identity as a tribe through figuring out this belief structure. And then the tribal belief structure, keep in mind, hearth belief structures may differ. Hearth mythology may differ somewhat from tribal mythology, because the hearth is sovereign, and so nobody can tell you how your hearth believes. But then there's going to be a general belief structure that we all agree upon within a tribal setting that is the tribal mythology. Is this set in stone? No, that's the beautiful thing. We are all constantly trying to figure out the world. We are all constantly trying to learn more about the gods and goddesses. We are trying to learn more about their interaction with the world. The moment that we believe we understand everything, we're done. We've stopped learning, we've closed our eyes, we've closed our minds, and there's nothing else occurring. Now, that... it's a sad thing, all right? It is a sad thing. Because we need to continue to grow. We need to continue to develop. We need to help heathenry live and breathe, because that's what it is. It's a living, breathing thing. And your tribal heathenry is going to be different from my tribal heathenry or from someone else's tribal heathenry. I know people who have very different views, who go about things in very different ways, who don't believe the same thing that I believe in the same kind of way. One of my dearest friends in the world has a significantly different belief structure as far as the mythology goes from my own. Does that invalidate his view on the mythos? No. That's his tribal mythos. This is mine. And I continue to build and develop and understand mine. I look to my people within my tribe and I listen to them and their insights, and we as a group continue to build and develop our tribal mythology, our understanding of the world around us, the influences of the gods and goddesses on the world around us, and we develop these things. So the essence of this video, of this part of the building tribal identity, is examine the mythos and begin to build your own tribal mythos. I guarantee you've already started doing it. You've already started this process, but you haven't really, not all of you, haven't really embraced it yet and said, okay, this is what we believe. And part of the reason is because in the general zeitgeist of everything, in the gestalt of the heathen world, there is a strong pressure to adhere to either just flat Norse Icelandic stuff, or to fit into the hardcore recon slot, or you're cast away as a fluffy bunny. And I think this is a flaw. I really do. I think our need to codify, name, and label everything is a problem. And I think that largely is why heathenry was the way that it was back in the days, because we didn't have, take a look at heathenry. That name is not a name that we gave it. That is not a name that our ancestors gave it. That's a name that contemporary Christians gave it, and people in the modern day took it up as kind of a thumbing our nose at those that would say nay. So it wasn't as labeled. It wasn't as codified. There were things that were, but for the most part, it wasn't like, your Gothi stood up with, his Gothord and said, we are heathen. They just simply had their beliefs and what they believed. They had the gods and goddesses. If you look at the Eddas and Sagas, some of the things that are referred to as gods and goddesses are what I would call gods and goddesses with the small g, as opposed to the big G. Big G, I'm talking about the Aesir. I'm talking about Odin and Thor and Frey and Freud. But there are, and I wish I could remember their names off the top of my head. I really got to go pull this reference so that I can stick it in places. But in one of the battles, one of the generals calls upon his familial goddesses, who are these two witchy women that stand up and then start to hurl hail and things like that at the enemies. And as long as they have these conjured and they are adding luck and strength to this side, it's damaging the other side, and it creates this almost insurmountable force. Could these be Disir? Possibly. Could these be localized goddesses? Possibly. From what I understand from the story, though, I believe them to be ancestral spirits, and therefore most likely Disir that have taken on a goddess level status within the family. Or could it simply be that whoever wrote it down did not understand that the Disir weren't necessarily goddesses, but had a godlike status within the family unit because of the importance and role they played? Because they were given so much importance, they were called goddesses by the onlookers, but may not necessarily have been called that by those within the familial structure. They may have just been called by their names. They may have been revered on an almost godlike status. God with a small g, maybe God with a big G. I don't know. It doesn't give that kind of details. And even if it did, it wasn't written down by one of those family members. It wasn't written down by someone within that tribal structure. So where that mythos falls within relation to that, I do not know. I only know the observations from the onlooker and how they codified that. But I do know that that deviates from calling upon Thor to bless you in battle, or to call upon Odin and sacrifice all of these slain. That is an example of familial cult coming into play, of that hearth cult coming into play. And I want to take a look at that. I want people to look at that and go, wait a minute. Maybe, just maybe, I don't have to do things necessarily the way that everybody else does. Maybe I'm not trying to be just like everybody else. I don't want to be a special snowflake just like everybody else. I just want to be me. And I believe that if I step out in battle and I call upon Aunt Hilga, who died hundreds of years ago in Norway, but she was a badass, and if I call upon her, she's going to bless me in battle. That's my belief structure. That if I call upon the Disir for my support and my structure, then cool. Now, there are certain cultural elements that are more globalized that we can pull from, terminology that we agree upon on a more globalized level, but that doesn't necessarily make them canon. There's no hard set scripture for heathenry, folks. That's not the way this works. You don't go through with some heathen Bible and this is how it was. No, heathens understood the world the way that they understood the world, through experience and through understanding and learning, and we're doing the same thing. We're building the same way. We're just doing it on our terms, on our turf. There's going to be regional differences. There's going to be time frame differences. There's going to be cultural influence, all kinds of things, because there's so many elements that go into it. But standing out and looking at the gods and goddesses from the viewpoint of a Texan, just because I live in 2019 in rural East Texas, and I step out and I look at the world around me, I behold Midgard, and I behold the influence of the gods and goddesses on Midgard through my own eyes. Is that any less valid than what was written down by some Christian monk hundreds of years after the story he wrote down was originally told? Does it? So think on that for a little bit. Hence the UPG warning in the top of my videos. Newsflash, all of this was UPG to somebody at some point in time. UPG is a stupid term. I hate it, but I use it because it simmers down certain individuals who otherwise would go keyboard warrior on all of my videos saying that this is made up BS, etc., etc., etc. UPG is a silly term. It means unverifiable personal gnosis, and it's all that way. It's all that way. It's belief. It's belief structure. Now, yes, certain things are kind of out there, and they're not belief structures that everybody as a society can necessarily agree upon. Does that invalidate your belief structure? No. Does that mean you necessarily want to step up into a group of heathens and start espousing this belief structure? Maybe not. Read the crowd. You know, if that's why tribal mythos is tribal. It stays within the tribe. Your belief structure is your belief structure. That's how you do things. And so, yeah, you know, don't go out and share it with other people because it's none of their business. It's not. Don't go and write your tribal mythology and then email it to me. I don't want to see it. Okay, guys? I want you to live it. I want you to understand it. Yeah, we'll talk about elements of it, and you'll be able to tell me, yeah, I actually see things working this way. I'll be like, that's cool. That's not how I see it, but that's cool. I can kind of see where you're coming from on this. Have you thought about this? Have you seen this element? And you'd be like, you know, I did, but the conversation can go back and forth, and people can develop and build and help each other grow and develop their own individual tribal mythologies simply by not being asshats about it. Don't be that guy. As my brother frequently says, don't be that asshole. So, yeah, it's a thing. Be kind to each other. Interact appropriately as mature adults. And, understand you don't have to tell all of your tribal business. You don't have to tell everybody else what your tribe believes because you do not need their approval. Mind blown, right? You don't need their approval. Their approval doesn't matter. The only approval that matters is the approval of your people. If you stand up with some harebrained idea and the rest of your folk in your tribe go, I think that's probably not right, then you should probably pull back and go, let me think on that again. Maybe I am just or maybe you're onto something and you need to continue to explore it and flesh it out until it does make sense, and then they can see what you see. Maybe, maybe not, but that's between you and your tribe. That is not between you and the rest of the world. Because the rest of the world is going to have their opinion on how your hearth should run. They're all going to have their opinion on how your tribe should run. Don't believe me? Ask any parent in the world if they talk to other strangers about parenting techniques. I'll bet you they don't. Not unless they're, just commiserating about very superficial, typically funny antics that occur. But as far as, whether or not we're going to break down and talk about disciplinary procedures, whether we're going to be talking about whether or not you should spank your child and things like that, they may talk on a broad sweeping, almost theological level on it. But I will almost guarantee you, outside of safe circles, their Innengarth and their folk community, they're not going to talk about how they do things in the house typically, because everybody and their dog is going to want to tell them how they should do it, how they ought to do it, how they're wrong about things. And you know what? None of their business. Not their kids, not their family, not their hall, not their call. Same thing when it comes to the mythos. Your mythos is your mythos, and that's a beautiful thing. Don't feel like you have to necessarily share it with everybody else, because they're going to tell you where you're wrong. They're going to tell you why you should believe this way or why you should believe that way. And not everybody's going to be that way. There are some genuinely decent people out there who are going to say, okay, cool, that's not how we do it, but I respect that. I'm one of those. You come to me and I'll be like, okay, cool. That's an interesting story. I really like the way that you've seen this, or this is a cool insight. You know what? That's not a bad idea. I'm going to explore some of that within our own tribal mythos and see how it shakes out. Doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to adopt it just because you came up and said, hey, this is my truth. Doesn't mean I'm going to automatically make it my truth, but I may examine it within the light of my mythos. It's how we grow. It's how we share. So, There are going to be trolls out there, though, that are going to straight up just tear you apart because they can. Just because they can. There's toxic people. There are individuals who have weak egos or weak tribal identities and therefore glom onto something that they have been fed through pop culture media or through some national organization or through just simply their limited understanding of heathenry as a whole, and they are going to want to just lambaste you for it. And that's not their place. It's not their place. But it also means that you need to be respectful in how you handle your tribal mythos as well. You don't need to go out there and just throw it in everybody's face and say, this is the one and only truth. That's not going to do you any good. That's going to alienate you from society, and people are not going to like you or want to interact with you. I have my tribal mythos. Easy for me to say. I have my tribal mythos. I have my hearth mythos. And then we are continuing to develop our tribal mythos as we continue to grow. And just like I'm continuing to develop my hearth mythos. We have our tribal mythos. I do not go out and tell it to everybody. I chose specific pieces of it to share with you guys on the video as an example. And they are broad sweeping things, you know, the simple part of Suna, the watermelons, and or was the watermelons in the last video? It all runs together. Anyway, and Livka and Heathen and the apples. I did not go into some of the specific elements of why we believe what we believe. I did not go into the rest of the story, because there is a story for how the year goes within our mythos and the influence of the gods and goddesses. And people ask me this all the time, what my belief structure is, what my holiday structure is, what my story for the gods and goddesses throughout the year interaction with the holidays and why and all this. People ask me that all the time in comments and in emails and stuff like that. So here you go, guys. I'm not going to tell you, not in its entirety, and definitely not on a public forum like this, because it's not for the public. It's for my tribe. That's what that's for. So Ridgar, shout out to you guys. I know you all are watching this, except for Twyla, she's listening to it. That's our way of doing things. That's what we do. That's for us. It's our hall, our call. Some of you, when I interact with you, I will share snippets of it because we get to that point conversationally where I feel like it's okay. You know, we establish a mutual respect that indicates that, okay, I can do this and share at least this tidbit. Does it mean that I'm going to let you into the depths of our mythology? No. And you shouldn't expect that from anyone else either. You shouldn't expect to go into a tribe and have them just explain to you everything about their tribal mythology. That would be inappropriate. Instead, just respect that they have one. They should respect that you have yours. And then figure out, you may need to share some key elements as far as, how that plays out with ritual and whatnot so you can come to a common ground. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to share and divulge the entirety of your mythology in order to make ends meet, as it were. But key element there, some people will include Loki, some people will not. Some people will include worship with Loki, some people will not. Some people, Loki is completely absent from their mythology. Some people, Loki is key to their mythology. So that's just one example. And it's kind of important when you sit down and do bloat to know whether or not bloat can be done regarding Loki. It's important when you sit down to sumble, especially, whether or not Loki can be hailed over the horn. In some tribes you can. In some tribes you cannot. Because tribal mythology feeds tribal thu. Why would tribal mythology influence whether or not Loki could be hailed in Sumble? Well, if the tribal mythology is that Loki is seen as a betrayer of Frith, a Frith breaker, and a betrayer of the family and oath, then, because that's one approach that you can look at it within the mythos as far as it's put down in the Eddas, is that you can see in Loki's antics, especially building up towards it, but then with the death of Balder, there's a great breaking of Frith here, and he is cast out as outlaw. And so if that is part of the tribal mythology, and yet you don't necessarily hang with that part, you hang more with the tribal mythology of Loki as trickster god, then he may have a place in your mythology, but he may not have a place in theirs. And to force your mythology into theirs when you are a guest, that would be inappropriate. Similarly, if they are a guest in your home and they're going to sit for Sumble, it might behoove them to know that is part of your mythology and that might occur in Sumble, because they may wish to abstain from Sumble as a result. Or, as gracious hosts, you may choose not to incorporate that element in this particular Sumble. I don't know. It varies tribe to tribe, hearth to hearth. It all plays out differently. So we're going to kill it here, guys, because I've rambled on for a good bit longer than usual. Simply because this is an important thing. The building of tribal mythos and the why. Now, I didn't necessarily go into the how as much because, let's be honest, that's not my place to tell you guys. You will develop your mythology. I've kind of explained how that develops, why it develops the way that it does, and what it is. But it's up to you guys whether or not you sit down and just go with a rough idea of, a progression through the year, etc., 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 or if you actually go through and write down and codify a mythology per se. Not everybody will. Some will. Sometimes it will be innate, and it will be, or it may be ornate. It may be loquacious to a fault. It may be very simple. It may be something that's written down on a cocktail napkin. It may be something that is codified into a book. It may be something that is passed down orally. It doesn't matter. Your hall, your call. You do your tribe the way you do your tribe. But it is beautiful nonetheless. And I love to see more and more of it come up. I love to see people incorporate elements. We're going to come back in a future video and talk about one of the requests that I got was some tips and tricks on ancestor worship and kind of the how to do that. And I've seen some really cool ideas as far as like altar setups and kind of projecty kind of things that you can do for idols and representations and things like that. So that's going to be a future video. How soon? I don't know yet. We'll see. Maybe sooner than later while I'm on this kick. It may be later as we build up towards episode 100. I don't know yet. But anyway, we're going to wrap it up here, guys. So thank you all so much for watching and for listening. If you're listening on the podcast at home, thank you guys. I really appreciate all of the support and the feedback, especially. If you guys like what you see, if you like what you hear, interact, all that stuff, let me know and I'll keep doing it, okay? Just a gentle reminder, I do have my book out there now, which does incorporate some of my own personal mythos and my own personal worldview into this storytelling element. So if you kind of want an example of how a hearth cult mythos would look as it plays out in a story, here's a little bit of one, little bit. If I write any in the future, additional books, then I may go deeper down that rabbit hole, but we shall see. So anyway, hail guys, thank you. May your hearth fires burn bright. Oh, okay, we're gonna try and do, it's hot in here. It's like 100 degrees outside. So anyway, Texas summer. Know what it's like. So the last video was supposed to be building tribal mythos. It became an introduction into tribal identity. And so I used it to kind of set the ground because I started to talk about why I was going to talk about building on tribal mythos, and I kind of went on a ramble rant and it became its own video. So we're going to try this again. I'm catching on my cable. So, crazy stuff. All right, so let's try again in 3, 2, 1. Let's jam.